Hello and welcome. We'll be starting in just a minute. All right, we're at 2 o'clock Eastern and we should be ready to start. Welcome to the webinar titled Making the Web Work for Everyone. My name is Ginny Bromberg and I am your host for today. I'm also the president of Bromberg and Associates and a court certified interpreter myself. Today, we're happy to have you join us for what we hope to be a fascinating, yet very practical hands-on conversation about digital accessibility. We have a team of ASL interpreters who will be providing accessibility in this webinar. Please pin them if needed, and if you need to use closed captioning, please also do that by turning the feature on Zoom. We will be having some poll questions and sharing some useful statistics in the chat. At the end of the webinar, we'll allocate a little bit of time to Q&A, so please have your questions ready. Now, let us get started with introducing our panelists. Bruce Adelson, Esquire, is a highly regarded expert in the areas of language access, disability access, and compliance. With his extensive experience and expertise, he serves as the Americans with Disabilities Act consultant to both the Idaho Supreme Court and New Mexico Administrative Office of the Courts. Prior to his current role in federal compliance consulting, Bruce was a senior trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice, where he worked to ensure compliance with federal laws protecting the rights of individuals with disabilities. In addition to his consulting work, Bruce is also a respected member of the academic community. He currently serves on the faculty of Georgetown University School of Medicine and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, where he teaches implicit bias in healthcare. Bruce has also taught at a number of other prestigious universities, including Harvard University, the Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health, and the University of Baltimore School of Law, among others. Welcome, Bruce. Happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Ginny. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure to see you and be part of another great webinar.
Thank you. And next, we have one of our own, Jessica Yakub, Director of Operations and Development at Bromberg and Associates. Jessica's role encompasses a diverse array of responsibilities, where she's not only supervising and facilitating communication across all departments, but also is playing a pivotal role in steering the company towards its development and accessibility goals. Jessica's expertise extends to client relations and language access services. She actively engages with clients to comprehensively assess their language access needs, offering insightful guidance and solutions. Jessica's linguistic talents further enhance her capabilities as she is a native Arabic speaker with fluency in French. She holds a bachelor's degree in linguistics with a double major in computer science earned at Wayne State University. Committed to continuing growth, she also earned her MBA at the University of Illinois Guy's College of Business with a focus on digital marketing and inclusive design. Jessica is an avid accessibility advocate and is currently pursuing her CPA-CC certificate through the Accessibility Association. Jessica, welcome.
Thanks, Ginny.
All right. So before I turn it over to you, let's have a poll. Let's have the first question because I really would like to see where everybody is in terms of their accessibility journey. All right, we'll give it about a minute for everybody to answer. And then we'll be sharing results. Since I'm not able to see the progress, if my team behind the scenes can look at how many people have answered and maybe give it another 20 seconds before we close this poll. All right. And here we go. Thank you so much. Well, somewhat familiar is at 48%, which is very indicative of where we should be, right, Bruce, in 2025. So thank you everybody for answering. And let's start with talking about web accessibility and WCAG standards. Bruce, I'll come to you first, and then we'll turn it over to Jessica.
Great. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. And I always welcome the opportunity to talk about web accessibility because for many people, many organizations, it still remains quite a challenge and something that seems very esoteric. But the law is very clearly developed in this area. So there's been a steady increase in federal court and now state court litigation about website accessibility and its relationship to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is a significant area of growth in legal claims and is one of the leading causes, the leading exemplars of federal civil rights litigation that are out there today. The standards that you mentioned are just they're standards. And at first blush, you might think, well, they're just standards and we don't need to follow them. But they've been incorporated into court decision after court decision. They're included in DOJ's first ever federal regulations about website accessibility. So they are much more mandatory than they would have been 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. They are part of the law now, and they provide a good stepping stone and a good entry door in a way to understanding what website accessibility actually is. And more importantly, that we'll be talking about what do you have to do to get there? Because of course, like many other things, it's the devil's in the details. And there are a lot of details when it comes to website accessibility.
Thank you, Bruce. I can add to that a little bit. So from a practical perspective, the WCAG standard is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, and we are at 2.1 version right now. So anything that you see out there that requires you to be compliant, it's now combining the 2.0 and the 2.1 version. The 2.0 version is evaluating 9 criterias. The 2.1 is evaluating 13 criteria at this point. So it's essentially very similar, but there have been some things added in the updated version. Most of the standards we're following, though, cover both. So you should be okay with whatever your web accessibility plan is, as long as you're at least basing it on the 2.0 version. The WCAG standard is not a new standard. This has been around for several decades. It was first published in 1999 by the World Wide Web Consortium, which is one of the resources we go to learn a lot of things about accessibility and standards. And it has a lot of resources for users, end users, for authoring tools for content developers and web developers. So it is a very good tool to get started. There's a lot of information out there, though, so you might need our help navigating that, because we've spent a lot of time making sure that we get the right information out there. The WCAG standard has several success levels. So you have the A, the double A, and the triple A. And most of everyone is trying to reach the double A standard. The federal, local, and state government is required to have the double A success level for accessibility. The standard has 4 pillars. They are summarized in the acronym called CORE. So you have to follow the content to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And these are pillars, and the names really, the acronym doesn't really cover what it actually means. There's a lot of details under each criteria here, and it would take hundreds of webinars for us to cover each of those. You have to keep in mind that perceivable content needs to be perceivable by everyone using the web, be regardless of if they use assistive technology, regardless of disability. Operable, it means people with assistive technology need to be able to operate your website or mobile app or whatever digital asset you have. Understandable is the logical order. It needs to be set up in an understandable way, as well as the language used, such as if it's in English, we're talking about plain language and simplification. And robust. Robust covers the future. So when you're designing a tool or a website, you have to account for the design element to be able to adjust for updates in the future, changes in standards and regulations, changes in best practices for the design aspect. So from that perspective, this is a very basic level of introducing WCAG, but WCAG is one of the standards we follow. There are other standards to be aware of, depending on what your role is at the organization in getting that content to go live for the public and for your end user. If you're a developer or content creator, you need to familiarize yourself with the authoring standard, how to author, how to write code, how to write content that is accessible. If you are a graphic designer, there is also a tool for how to design universal and inclusive design under those standards. And if you are at the client side or the user side, understanding the law and those standards and what users may need to access the web is very essential on this web accessibility or digital accessibility quest.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, I'd like to,
Excuse me,
go ahead, Bruce, please.
There are a couple of things that I wanted to expand on that Jessica was talking about. Jessica had mentioned that local and state governments are currently required to abide by the Justice Department's regulations on website accessibility. I wanted to add to that, so are federally funded healthcare entities. That's part of the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act has adopted the definition of federally funded healthcare organizations, local and state government being at the highest level of compliance under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's for all of you folks who are familiar with that. That's ADA Title II. So that's was a change that was brought in by the Affordable Care Act when it became law 10 years ago. It remains the law. And there was a mention about website accessibility plans. I didn't want to leave that without really focusing on that. Many of you may know or have heard of language access plans. Website accessibility plans, in a way, are even more important because courts have actually singled them out as being examples of an organization's compliance if the plan sets out a reasonable time frame to go accessible, and it talks about specific changes that the organization is going to make. Courts have referenced that specifically in a way that lets the organization off the hook for liability purposes for the most part. So I really wanted to emphasize that website accessibility plans are extremely important, and they are essentially what is your plan to become accessible in all the ways that Jessica was talking about. What's your time frame? Because, you know, we can snap our fingers today. That doesn't mean in 3 hours that your website's going to be accessible. It takes time. Well, the plan incorporates your thinking in a very important way. You can show it to the court if you get sued. And the point about be prepared for the future is really important. But also rhetorically, think about this. If you go online and look at virtually any website, the website is constantly changing, or it could be constantly changing with updates, new videos, streamers at the top. Well, let's assume that your website was accessible at 8 o'clock in the morning. Is it still accessible at 9 o'clock? Depending on what you're posting and depending on what the streamer says, if you have a stream, either the top or the bottom, think about that. Because I think that's also indicative of the future. The question in website accessibility compliance or the website accessibility law has always been, if my website is good at 8 o'clock and it's been confirmed that it's good by experts, does that mean I'm good to go forever? I think we know the answer to that. No. That's part of what is somewhat unique about this area of law, is that it's constantly changing. The website, so many websites are constantly evolving and changing as far as the content that's posted. So I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on those points, and they really, I think, show the breadth of what we're talking about, and gets really into what Jessica was stressing about the WCAG standards and being prepared to make additional changes as we move forward into the future, because there will be more standards, more rules, more guidelines. It's not like we're all done and hey, you know what, we're good to go. We know everything that we're supposed to do. That's going to change. It's just a matter of when.
So it's
And the
shift on the
key is in the
mindset.
design.
Go ahead. We were saying the same thing, just in different words. The
Yeah.
shift on the mindset.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jess.
and the key is in the design. We try to help our clients and steer them in a direction where you can have a design your website or your whatever your digital asset is. It could be a piece of software, in a way that is sustainable long term. Because when you make a web accessibility plan, that web accessibility plan has to be current. So if you make updates to your software, you make updates to your website, if you're using plugins that update regularly and that may become non-compatible with your web accessibility on your websites, you are responsible for all of that. So all of that needs to be taken into account. And there are so many best practices to implement in design that make the web accessible to a lot of people, not just people with disability, to everyone. So there are feature enhancement, that what I would like to call, there's a lot of way to enhance your web design and your digital content design in a way that is enhancing that accessibility experience, but also improving the experience to everyone who is coming to your website or using your software. So having a web accessibility plan, I would say, is a little bit different than having a language access plan, because the web accessibility plan will require constant updating if you make constant changes to your digital assets that are covered in that plan. And if third party tools and software make changes as well, you are responsible for ensuring that those changes are still compatible with your web accessibility practices.
I would like to circle back to third-party tools in just a second, but I'd like to talk a little bit about existing DOJ regulations for web accessibility and go to Bruce with that.
These regulations have been talked about for years. They were put off going back to the Obama administration, then the first Trump administration. We want them, we need them. I mean, it's relatively unusual for organizations to say, please regulate us and tell us what the regulations are, because as Jessica just said, it's constantly changing, this area. So having some legal guidelines to inform what changes you make is really important. So DOJ came out with the first regulations. I think they were became final and became law last year. The regulations are like a test in the sense that they only cover Title II entities. So remember, that's state and local government, and federally subsidized healthcare providers. The thinking is that if these regulations are helpful, if the regulations need to be changed, when we move to regulate Title III businesses, which are basically places of public accommodation, hotels, restaurants, for example, when we move to Title III, then, well, we know what works and what doesn't work. There may still be courts that use the Title II regulations generally as a guide to inform whatever case they're hearing if it involves a hotel, for example. So while they're not legally enforceable against a hotel right now, they can provide that background, that context for, well, Title II says this. Are you doing any of this? Has this been addressed? Are you handling this issue? So for those of you who work for organizations that are not covered by Title II, I think that you should give a serious read to the Title II regulations. That's certainly what I tell my clients, that just because you're not a state government doesn't mean you should ignore these, because it gives you an idea of where the feds are thinking about this, and is reflective of current law in many ways.
And you could also be subject to a lawsuit.
Yeah,
As a-
that's like one of my favorite words, you know that. But yes, you're right. I mean, I can imagine, certainly if I were suing somebody over website accessibility, that's a hotel, for example, I would use the Title II regulations just as an example to show the court they're not even complying with these. So they may not be covered by them explicitly, but thousands of organizations are, and they're not even doing that. So a court would be impressed with that, impressed enough to turn to the organization's lawyer and say, what do you have to say about that? Is Mr. Adelson right? So then when the lawyer concedes he is, then the judge is going to say, I think we need to have another hearing about this. So there's a lot out there. Look at the regulations, see what the priorities are, and then start implementing the changes you need to.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Jessica, if you would like to add something to that, okay. I
This
think
is
the
very
legal
well
part.
put. The legal part is Bruce's area of expertise. This is very well put. What I want to highlight is that one of our team has shared some very important statistics in the chat, which I think puts a lot of what we're talking about in perspective as far as what it means to create web accessible content, and who we're serving and who we're granting access to when we do that. Because if we take the global statistics and we see that 1.3 billion people globally, so 1 in 6 people have a disability that would require them to use some sort of assistive technology, then we realize that from a business perspective, if you are in the business of serving people and making money, if I can go as far as saying that, you would want those people to be able to access your services digitally in this day and age, you know, where everything is done through the internet. So you probably don't want to lose out on that market by not having web accessible content online, whatever your services are going to cover. If you're an agency, if you're an entity that you want people to answer a survey online, or if you want people to pay their bills online, you want to make that interface accessible. If you're a business, you want people to access your services. If you're a hotel or a language company like we are, or a lawyer or an attorney like Bruce is, and people are gonna find us online, that's the first thing they do. They go on Google and they search for us. And if they can't access our website, they're gonna turn away and they're gonna go and look for an accessible website. Because when you're using assistive technology, it's not really a choice. You can't just say, well, yeah, it's not accessible, but it's okay. Like, I still want to work with them. That's not a possibility. If it's not accessible, you don't even get to the point where you are generating that lead in the first place. They're leaving right away because they can't access the portion of your website or flyer or service or program in the first place to even decide if they want to work with you or not. So it's an immediate turn off, it's an immediate loss of business. And the stats show that with 75% of Americans with disabilities using the internet daily, all these people are using websites that are accessible because otherwise they can't use these websites. We are trying to create a world where people can, for the first time ever, do things independently, regardless of if they have a disability or not. In the past, that wouldn't be possible. Somebody wouldn't be able to access the news. A blind person wouldn't be able to access the news unless somebody read the newspaper for them. We live in a world where that's a possibility now through screen readers. But when you don't make your news website online accessible, that's like being back in the 1920s with somebody needing to read a newspaper for you. So there's a lot of considerations there as well. Social responsibility and from the social responsibility approach too.
Jessica, thank you for that. What I would like to do now is also look at things from a global perspective, because it's not just in the US, right? And we don't
Correct.
operate just in the US within the boundaries. So this is a global requirement. And if you'd like to talk a little bit about that, either Jessica or Bruce.
Bruce will do the heavy lifting. I'll just introduce the topic because it is still a legal approach as well. Obviously there's a lot of standards now, not standards. There are a lot of policies and laws in the world globally about web accessibility. So this is a global phenomenon. This is not something that's just happening in the US. And very soon in Europe, we will have the European Accessibility Act, which is already in place, but enforcement will start in July of 2025. So we're expecting to see a very serious change in Europe as well when it comes to web accessibility. All of these policies and laws are mainly referencing the WCAG standard. So the WCAG standard is always a really good place to start. Understanding that you don't have to be a lawyer or an attorney to understand that. You also don't need to have to be a web developer to understand what needs to be done. In fact, most of the web accessibility remediation work can be done in the content planning stage before you even get to the web development. And a lot of the changes are very simple, where you can reach the level of accessibility required without touching the code on your website. But we will get into that a little bit later in this webinar because I will demo a little website to show you how that would work in real life. Bruce, feel free.
Oh, thanks. And that's a great summary, Jessica. This is a legal issue that is transcending borders all over the world. And there are, of course, a lot of differences. The EU or standards that are going to, where they'll start enforcing them later this year, are one of the few legal requirements like the Americans with Disabilities Act that covers both private business and public entities. Most of the laws in individual countries are focused only on public entities. So that would be like local and state government, for example. But the EU standards are broader and they're more similar to what we have here with the ADA. Many countries, whether they're Canada or others, their laws are basically accessibility acts. So imagine having an American Accessibility Act without the ADA. That's what most of these laws are. And I think that's part of the reason that they're not as broad as the laws are in the US, because we have this underpinning statute, the ADA, which there is no similar law that I'm aware of in another country with the breadth of the Disabilities Act. But to the points that you've heard, yeah, this is a global issue. This isn't just isolated in some corner of some isolated region. This is a global issue, and obviously websites have global reach, and that will continue. I think one of the commonalities with everything we're talking about today, all of this will continue. It's not ending. Next month, next year, this is going on for years, if not indefinitely, because of the world that we live in, as Jessica was talking about, that everything is web driven, internet access driven, Wi-Fi driven. That's not changing until we go to the next iteration of Wi-Fi, for example. So that's something to really take to the proverbial bank in a way, and take to the leadership of your organizations. This is not going away. This is only going to grow in scope and frankly grow in demand too.
Thank you, Bruce. I think that's a great point. And with that, we're actually going to be shifting a little bit to the practical part of our conversation. But first, I think to set the stage, we should talk a little bit about third-party tools that we've mentioned earlier. Because I've
Yeah.
heard many questions about, well, why can't we just use a plugin for accessibility? Or
Yeah.
do an audit of the website in an automated way? I'll go to you, Jessica, first.
Yeah. So the concern with using third-party tools with or without accessibility at the center is the same. When you're using a third-party tool, you don't have control over how that tool is built and what that tool does and what happens on the back end. Obviously, you can choose your tools wisely, but still, you're using a third-party tool. You're not creating something custom for you and your needs specifically. But when it comes to accessibility specifically, there are two ways to look at it. There is third-party tools that you will use on your website that are not related to accessibility. Like you have an e-commerce website and you use a third-party tool to create your cart or for people to be able to put things in your cart or to check out, something like that. You are responsible to make sure that the tool you're using is first accessible. So the tool maker, the creator of this software, they have accessibility in mind. So it is your responsibility to select third-party vendors who also design accessible tools. The second part of it is that you are responsible for making sure that when you implement that tool on your website, that third-party tool, you are making it accessible with the rest of the accessibility features you're implementing on the website. So you can't implement accessibility on the website, but when somebody gets to that part of the website, which is checking out, they can't do it anymore because the tool you're using is not accessible. So you did everything, you create an accessible experience up to that point, but the main thing that they actually want to do at the end of their experience, they can't do that because the screen reader is stuck. It can't move to the next box anymore because the tool is not accessible. So it is your responsibility to do that. The other part of this is accessibility tools. So tools that you see on websites, now they're called widgets. So any sort of accessibility widgets that you may implement on your website where you see that little accessibility pop up sometimes on websites, that's using widgets. And right now, widgets are coming under fire because there's a lot of widgets claiming that they can achieve 100% accessibility. There is no such thing as 100% accessibility. So if you come across a tool that's promising 100% accessibility, you should call their bluff because there's no such thing. Another one that is really coming up now is that by implementing these tools, there's a conflict that's happening with the website at that point, and it is creating even a less accessible experience than not having that widget on the website. So like the screen reader will conflict that widget, and then it can't go through the regular reading order, even if you have it set up correctly. And then there is a legitimate ethical consideration here, is that what some companies may choose to do, businesses, companies, agencies, is resort to these widgets for a lot of reasons. One of them would be cost, obviously, to have like a band-aid on accessibility. So say like, this is, we patched it, this is what we're doing as our accessibility effort, which is not enough, not even close to being enough. And that's almost opening people up to lawsuits, because when somebody comes to your website and sees a widget, if they are in the accessibility space or know anything about widgets, they're gonna know right away that you have not made any remediation efforts on your website. You just implemented this widget. So your website is very likely to be 99% non-accessible, and therefore you can get sued for that. So understanding that there is no automated tools that can get you to the standards of accessibility required. There are no widgets or plugins that you can put on your website that would be good enough for accessibility. And there's always needs to be a human intervention here, whether you're doing an audit. You can use automatic audits. It can identify a lot of errors, but with accessibility, there's a lot of errors and major ones like contrast that are not identifiable by an automatic audit. So you still have to go and get a human being to do that. Things related to remediation as well. There is no tool out there that can go through your website and remediate it. The process of remediating websites would require changing the HTML code and implementing something called ARIA, which is the accessibility standard for HTML. So you go through your code, and a lot of times the changes are very minimal and very reasonable and very achievable. And you see what the errors you have, and you implement ARIA, your developers implement ARIA on the back end of the website. No tool can do that automatically for you at this point. So there is nothing. So when you put a widget, essentially, it's just one line of code that's saying, now this person can come and use this widget to zoom in to the website. And that's something they can do without the widget, but now there is a widget for them to do it. So taking that into consideration. So it's just a patch, and it's not a good patch, and it's opening people up to litigation and companies now, because there are people out there who are looking for websites who have widgets to sue them.
Thank you, Jess, for that compelling overview. Bruce, do you have more to add?
Sure. Well, Jessica said the magic word, sue. So, we have to talk about that. The issue with the websites is no matter how many widgets you use, it's your website. It's not the widget's website. It's not the widget manufacturer's website. So you could say from today until the end of the year that, well, I got this widget. It's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. And then when you're being cross-examined in court, the lawyer says, but this is still your website. Isn't that correct? Yes. You turn to the jury with a little wink and a nod, and then you sit down. You have to perform due diligence, just like with any product that you're using and holding out to the public. And to Jessica's point, if the widgets don't work the way they are represented to work, which brings up whole other issues legally involving the widget manufacturer. Remember, it is your website. You are responsible for you put on your website what you don't put on your website. And if your website is not accessible, you are liable, not the widget manufacturer. You have your own claims against that manufacturer. But relying on these scam artists in a way who are just proposing these fast and easy solutions and say, yeah, put this in and you're 100% compliant. As Jessica said, that's impossible. So if someone is promising the impossible, if something sounds too good, run away and do your due diligence and find somebody who can actually give you accurate information, advance your accessibility goals and requirements, and put you in a much better situation legally than if you're relying on a manufacturer who is not delivering what they promised they would deliver.
Thank you, Bruce. And from my perspective, even if a widget is actually a good widget, something that you said before was that plan to continue working on your web accessibility, on your digital accessibility. So if a widget works for you for a period of time, serving a very specific purpose, A, your website will change, and B, the widget might become not compatible with your website, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think we can switch now to the conversation about the website that you, Jessica, were going to provide us as an example of what we should be looking at. But before we do that, and while you're setting up, could we do the second poll real quick?
Absolutely.
All right. And if we can launch the poll, we can talk about major challenges with web accessibility implementation. Thank you. We'll let it go for about a minute, and then Jessica will be sharing her website, well, her screen with the website.
Yeah, and to preface this, this is a demo website to show the purpose is to demonstrate how you can make a website accessible without immense effort, and how to understand with accessibility issues when you try to audit your website and make sense of what's going on. So it's not a real website, it's a demonstration website, but once I share my screen, it will make sense.
All right, how are we doing with the numbers, team? Because again, I can't see the number of people who have answered already.
It's about 50% now.
Okay, let's give it another 10 seconds.
Okay.
So if everybody can answer, we will be closing the poll in just a few seconds and then sharing the results. All right, I think we can do that now. Okay. This is interesting. Understanding compliance requirements.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll be talking about compliance requirements from a practical standpoint next.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see your screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So like I said, this is a demo website. So this is supposed to show you what maybe a local newspaper would have for a digital website. And right now we are in the accessible version. So let me go to the inaccessible page. And I'm just going to switch between the two pages. I just want to see if you notice the difference. So this is the inaccessible page. This is the accessible page, I'm sorry. Okay, and this is the inaccessible page. For the most part, it stays the same. So we would like to debunk a myth as well in this webinar, is that accessibility doesn't mean boring website, boring design and no colors and stripped HTML. For the most part, a lot of the accessibility work you do on your website doesn't really affect the design. There are some design elements on a website that are difficult to make accessible, like moving content and moving banners and autoplay audio and that sort of thing. So there are some best practices on what things to use and not to use on the website. But for a website like this one, for example, it doesn't really make a huge difference when we make it accessible. It makes a huge difference for people who use assistive technology, which I think is a pretty good use case in this topic. So if we're looking at this inaccessible website, if we show some annotation to show some of the accessibility issues we have here. So if I look at the first one and I click on it, the problem I have here is not detectable to the naked eye. So if we go to the accessible website, it's essentially the same thing. We don't really have an issue here. The issue is in the backend, and it's related to alt text. So when they designed this website, they decided to provide alt text, which is nice because a lot of time you wouldn't find alt text for this. But when they put the alt text, they decided to do a very long description of the alt text saying, this is a red dot with the white letter C that symbolizes a moon crescent as well as the sun. This logo is followed by a black banner that says City Lights, which is the name of this online portal. Finally, the slogan of the portal, your access to the city, follows in a turquoise green handwriting style and with a slight slant across the top banner. This is a very elaborate alt text, and for somebody who is blind or low vision who is using a screen reader, this may be impossible for them to discern in a website where everything is being read by the screen reader. So when this gets read, the next thing that gets read is quick menu, traffic, construction work on main road. Today, it would say something like header 1 before that. Wednesday, 29 January 2025, sunny, 23 degrees Celsius. Header 2, welcome to City Lights. So when you have such an elaborate alt text, it's hard for the user to understand, like, what is this? Is this like a text on the page, or is this, is this a description of an image? This is too much. So when we go to the accessible website and we look at the alt text that they chose for accessibility purposes, the alt text reads, City Lights, your access to the city, which is everything that's needed. Because me, as somebody who doesn't have perfect vision but doesn't need assistive technology or a screen reader to go through this website, all I need to know is City Lights, your access to the city. That's all. I don't get all this from looking at that logo. So we just want to create the same experience for people who are using assistive technology. Having that mindset will help you a lot understanding accessibility. So it's not like an extra step or an extra measure. It's literally making sure you design your content for everybody. And when you get in that mindset, things start becoming more reasonable and more achievable than when thinking, okay, now I have to make something accessible. And then if we go back to the inaccessible page for a second example, it's also about alt text. This is an image, and I would expect this to say something like free penguin concert or penguin concert on the stage or something like that. But if we click on this, this is completely missing alt text. So what happens for somebody using a screen reader, they actually don't get any input for this. They don't know this exists. So they don't see it, they don't hear it, they don't know this is on the page. If we go to the accessible page, we will look at this and it says free penguins playing on stage. Very simple, very straight to the point, giving somebody input on this image for them to try and envision what that may look like. Let's go through a bit of a different error. So for example, we have this one. The text alternative for the image is provided in the title attribute alone, which is not usable for many readers. Moreover, the text alternative image does not describe the image. So for example, the alternative text they used for this image is image. This alternative text should say man in orange shirt or whatever it is that you want to convey through this image. Maybe like man in summer clothing. I don't know. It would depend on what idea you're trying to get across. Another thing here would be something like the links and how the links are labeled. So for example, in the inaccessible website, there is no way for us to know this is a clickable link or if this is a link at all. The only way you find out is by hovering over it and then the cursor of your mouse changes to a clickable finger, which for somebody who cannot see the screen, this means nothing to them. This doesn't exist for them. One way to make this accessible is by highlighting the link in another way. And in this website, they chose to highlight the link by turning it red when you hover over it, which is one way to make it accessible. But another way that you can even take it further, because if somebody is colorblind, they also may not notice this color change, or people who can't see red may not notice this color change. Is you can also underline this to make sure that everyone can understand that this is a link, whether they can see colors, cannot see colors, and they don't have to hover over it to know that. So these are just a few examples of accessibility issues on a website. There's a lot more that we can talk about. We don't have the time for that today. But if we look at this website furthermore, we will see certain things related to links as well, being like this is an inaccessible way of displaying links where you put the name of the link is click here. So when somebody has a screen reader, this will read click here. It won't read the link actually. So they don't know what they're clicking on, which can be very problematic for people using screen reader. So instead, you actually title the link with the name of the description of what the link does. This is a link to killer bees. This is a link to onions. So when a screen reader gets here, it reads link onions. So the user knows what they're clicking on. These are just a few examples to put it in perspective of how little effort it takes to make a website accessible, but it makes the whole difference for people using assistive technology. It will make a huge difference for you as well as an agency or a business, because you will be protecting yourself against lawsuits and everything else that comes with that.
Jessica, thank you. I think this was really very interesting, very simple, and yet very eye-opening for those who have never seen the accessible and inaccessible websites side by side in this context. So now what I would like to do, we have a few questions in the Q&A, so we can address those, and then we can talk about next steps. What should everybody do after the webinar? And what should be fairly easy to do, right? But let's address the questions that we have in Q&A right now. And one question is, are website accessibility plans required in the same way as language access plans are? If so, required by the Joint Commission or by DOJ or both? Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The Joint Commission really isn't involved in setting any kind of requirements in this area. DOJ doesn't expressly require website accessibility plans. However, as I said earlier, there are demonstrated court decisions where the court has said their website accessibility plan shows that they are in the midst of compliance. So are you going to find a regulation where it says in a regulation that you must have one? No. Are they recommended strongly? Yes. I will tell you from my career as a lawyer, if you have a federal judge who says it's good that you have this, then guess what? You need to have it. So it's, in a way, I think it's even more important than a language access plan, as I said earlier, because this is still a new area. And the fact that these plans have been used to deflect liability prove the point. So to me, every entity, person, organization I work with on accessibility, I tell them you have to have one, period. Because it's been proven to be incredibly successful in winning lawsuits that are brought for accessibility reasons.
Thank you, Bruce. The next question is for you as well. And it's a question of the moment. Is Trump's executive order ending DEI and accessibility programs in the federal government legal?
Oh boy.
Reference. Trump calls DEI programs illegal. He plans to end them in the federal government. And there is quite a bit. I'm sure you can access the Q&A, so I don't read the whole thing, but that just referenced the recent developments, what happened on Monday with the executive orders and whatnot. So where are we at with web accessibility, digital accessibility from this standpoint?
Executive orders basically have no impact beyond the federal government. So they impact federal agencies, federal employees, and federal contractors, period. They don't impact me. They have no jurisdiction over me or any of you unless you're a federal employee. So the executive order can say from now until doomsday that we don't want accessible websites anymore. It means nothing. because it doesn't change any of the requirements. They're enshrined in federal regulations, which are laws, and in court decisions. So executive orders, there's been some, again, not completely accurate information. Executive orders are not laws. They are indications of policy directions and intent. They are not laws. And that, needless to say, is to your point, Ginny, I've been answering a lot of questions recently about executive orders and have done some postings about them. And the DEI orders have nothing to do with website accessibility, and the DEI orders have their own legal issues associated with them that I think is a little bit beyond our scope for today. But they have, these orders have nothing to do with the accessibility requirements.
Thank you, Bruce.
I can
And
add,
I
I
just
can
wanted
add
to say
something to
this.
this.
I just want to say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
As your favorite term, they can still get sued.
Well, yes, and yes. Although I will tell you, if anybody hears of if anybody knows of any lawsuit where lawyers are actually citing an executive order as the basis for liability, call, text, email me, and come to my office door, because that lawyer you want to run away from, because executive orders expressly say they do not create rights. So yes, you still can be, but if that's all the lawyers got, yeah, you're going to have to pay your lawyer to defend you, but you're eventually going to win that case.
Jessica, turning it over to you.
Yeah, this is something to reference something we were discussing right before the webinar, because we knew this question was going to come up, and Bruce and I were talking about it earlier, is that the law remains the law, and the lawsuits will remain increasing, will continue to increase. So you will get sued. No one is going to stop refrain from suing you because there is an executive order, or even there is a shift in an administration or anything like that. So we are expecting lawsuits to continue at the same rate, if not at an increased rate. But I think a lot of people are concerned about enforcement, and I will want Bruce to comment on this, but we were discussing this before our call, and with the new administration, maybe some enforcement will be slower or a little bit more relaxed than it has been in the past, but the lawsuit rates will not drop.
Yeah, and that's a perfect way to put it, Jessica. The lawsuits are their own creature, just like enforcements are their own creature. What DOJ does or doesn't do is not going to change the fact of lawsuits. The lawsuits will continue, they will increase, and the law will continue to develop, no matter if DOJ does nothing for the rest of this presidential administration. So understand that they're both different entities. They don't interrelate in that one controls the other. The lawsuits are going to continue, book it. There's no way that's changing. And I don't, as you all know, I don't like to make conclusive statements very much, but this is a good time for one. The lawsuits are going to continue to grow, period. And we'll just have to see what the administration does on its own with enforcement.
Thank you both. So very briefly, in 1 minute, Bruce and Jessica, what should our next steps be? Us and our participants. Bruce?
I would like to take credit for this, but I can't, because while we were talking the last few minutes, I got an email from a client saying that they had read DOJ's Title II regulations. And the client said, everyone, even private businesses, everybody should read them because they set out a good guideline, a good map to where you need to go. So again, I can't take credit for that, but I certainly agree, as we talked about earlier. Read those Title II regulations, read DOJ's guidance. From a legal perspective, I would do that before you go home today, just to get an idea of the bigger picture legally.
Thank you, Bruce. Jessica?
So to wrap up, I just like to start with something relatable to all of us. The way we think about disability as a first step. So disability, we can be born with disability. We can develop disability later in life. It can be situational. It can be temporary. So we are all at any point of our lives could be subject to disability. So we should all be working towards a world where if we are ever subject to disability, we are living in an accessible world. So that's something that I think everyone can relate to on this call. Secondly, what you can do next. What you can do next is a lot of things, but very simple and small steps to reach that milestone of accessibility if that's your goal this year. First of all, look at your website and try to figure out if you have invested in accessibility at all in your website. Then look at your other digital content and figure out what's public facing and needs to be accessible. Start making those lists of what things that should be made accessible. The first step in that is trying to figure out how to implement the web accessibility statement on your website, which we can help you with. And figuring out if you can get an audit to your website, because that's the first step of understanding what accessibility issues you're dealing with. We can always be your accessibility partner and assist you with navigating the accessibility space as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, website audit, website accessibility statement, and website accessibility plan. I think those are really good takeaways. And this is the end of our webinar. Thank you so much, Bruce and Jessica, for sharing your knowledge and expertise today. Thank you to our ASL interpreters for keeping up with all the industry terms and lingo. Thank you, everybody, for attending and for bringing your questions. Please make sure to complete a very short survey when you leave. The survey will help us understand more of your needs and offer you what you're interested in our future webinar installments. And we look forward to your questions after the webinar with regards to web accessibility and other services we provide. Looking forward to your input. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you
Have
so
a great
much.
day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.